Hello, I am Mehdi. The story I am about to share with you is from 1997. I was in my last year of high school, and my mind was preoccupied with everything except studying. I loved to be out exploring all the time and took every opportunity to go hiking in the mountains and forests. One winter day, some friends and I decided to skip school on Wednesday and go to a village located in the forested roads near our city. The village was surrounded by tall mountains, and we planned to stay there until the weekend. There were 5 of us, me, Rahim, Vahshat, and 2 brothers named Amin and Ali Reza. Rahim, who was full of energy, used to go to the village with his family during the summers, and his father's house was in that very village. As planned, we set off and arrived at the village on Wednesday afternoon. Our city and the surrounding villages are lush and beautiful, but the nature in that village was even more pristine and charming. At that time, the village still did not have electricity, and the residents spent their nights by lantern light. In that environment, besides the sound of roosters and sometimes dogs barking, you could only hear the singing of birds. We, 5 chatty and adventure-loving people, felt a sense of calm as soon as we entered the silence of the village. The peaceful atmosphere gave us a great feeling. In winter, only 2 elderly families lived in the village. After wandering around the village a bit, we entered Rahim's house, which was an old and cozy place. After sunset, the weather became very cold, and we were shivering, but once the wood stove was lit, a pleasant warmth filled the house. We had brought some food and meat with us, so we quickly set up for a barbecue. After eating dinner and filling our bellies, we lounged by the stove, and Vahshat began telling a scary story. He told it in such a way that we were completely absorbed in it. Suddenly, Rahim interrupted and said, "Guys, we are going to get rich." I looked at Rahim and said, "Do not talk nonsense. Let him finish his story." But Vahshat, who seemed to have lost the thread of his story upon hearing the word money, asked Rahim, "What do you mean?" Rahim, who had moved away from the stove, crawled closer to us as if 100 people were eavesdropping on us from behind the walls. He leaned in and quietly said, "My father and his friend have a treasure map, and I know where the treasure is." I looked at Rahim and said, "Well, if you know where it is, then it is not really a treasure map anymore. Surely, they have found the treasure by now." Rahim confidently replied, "Are you underestimating me?" and then lowered his voice again, saying, "A while ago, my father and his friend brought a treasure detector and found the treasure's location. But because the village was crowded, they postponed the excavation until winter when the village would be quiet. I secretly followed them and know where the treasure is. Now the village is quiet, and except for 4 old men and women who go to bed early, no one else is here. If you agree, we can dig up the treasure and share it among ourselves." Hearing this, an intense excitement filled our hearts. We began imagining the treasure that Rahim was talking about. Suddenly, Amin, who was getting carried away, stood up and said, "Let us go dig up the treasure and become rich." We all stood up, and as if we were going on a fun trip, we happily and eagerly left the cottage with a lantern. Rahim opened the storeroom in the yard, went inside, and came out with a shovel and pickaxe. We set off. On the way, we were talking about the treasure when Rahim said, "Hey, be quiet so no one notices where we are going and what we are up to." Once we left the village, The beautiful sounds of roosters and birds we had heard during the day were replaced by the sounds of wolves and the rustling of wild boars moving through the forest bushes. The beautiful scenery we had seen during the day was now just darkness, creating a frightening, intense atmosphere. Gradually, our laughter and conversations turned into silence, and we all carefully watched our surroundings. As we were passing through the village cemetery, Rahim was leading the way with the lantern, and we were following him like a train when suddenly we heard Ali Reza shout from behind us. When we turned around, we saw that he had fallen to the ground. His brother Amin quickly reached him and asked, "What happened to you?" Ali Reza, looking around with fear, said, "I think someone pulled my leg." Amin replied, "Come on. Your foot must have caught on the edge of the graves, and you fell." Rahim, holding the lantern, stood beside them and said, "Oh my God, look at what clumsy friends I brought to find the treasure. You have not even reached the destination yet, and you are already getting hurt one by one." Rahim helped Ali Reza up from the ground, and our train started moving again. As we left the cemetery, we could hear Ali Reza reciting verses from the holy book, the Quran, behind us. After going down a slope, Rahim stopped next to a large tree at the bottom of the hill and said, "Here it is." A stick had been driven into the ground as a marker. We looked at each other, and feeling the cold, I said, "What are you waiting for?" I took the pickaxe from Amin and started digging, and Vahshat began shoveling the soil I was digging up. The others, also feeling cold, were eagerly waiting to take over the shoveling and warm themselves up a bit. We worked quickly and had dug about 1 meter deep when we heard the sound of the pickaxe hitting something hard. Rahim, who was in the hole, said, "We have hit a big rock." He raised the pickaxe above his head again, and when he brought it down on the ground, we heard a sound like a moan. Rahim looked up in surprise and said to us, "Stop the kidding." We looked at each other and raised our hands, indicating that we had no idea what he was talking about. I was holding the lantern and moved it around a bit to look at our surroundings. All I could see was darkness. The foggy weather made it so that we could only see a few steps ahead of us. I stood near the hole and raised the lantern higher to see inside. Rahim was standing still, clearly scared by the moaning sound he had heard. I said to him, "Rahim, what are you waiting for? Come on." Rahim looked at me and the others who were waiting, raised the pickaxe above his head, and brought it down with speed. The impact of the pickaxe on the ground caused a loud noise like an explosion and a bright spark. Rahim dropped the pickaxe and jumped out of the hole, terrified. We all stood there, stunned, watching Rahim, who was trembling with fear. He said, "Guys, I think we should give up." In that time, we knew nothing about cursed treasures and were still greedy for the treasure Rahim had mentioned, dismissed the sound and spark as just a pickaxe hitting a rock. Vahshat, holding the shovel, said, "Let me clear away the soil so we can see what is underneath more clearly." He got into the hole, and I bent down a bit, lowering the lantern to see inside. Vahshat was shoveling away the soil and throwing it out of the hole when suddenly we heard a voice from behind the tree that shouted, "Get lost." I quickly stood up and swung the lantern around to see where the voice was coming from, and I heard Vahshat say, "Who are they?" I looked in the direction Vahshat was pointing. Behind me, in that darkness and foggy weather, 3 figures resembling human beings were standing on 2 legs, but their bodies and faces were covered in fur like bears, and only their red eyes were visible. I was frozen with fear, and out of the corner of my eye, I could see the others running away. I heard Rahim's voice shouting, "Mehdi, run!" Suddenly, I snapped out of it. I dropped the lantern and ran towards the hill. All I could see was Rahim running ahead of me. As we passed the cemetery, I heard a sound like a large rock falling into the water. I picked up speed and kept running. When I reached the house, the door was open. I jumped inside and shut the door. Rahim, panting heavily, asked, "What were those cursed things?" Suddenly, Amin stood up and shouted, "Where is my brother?" We all stared at each other in shock. Amin opened the door, ran outside, and yelled, "Ali Reza?" He came back inside and burst into tears. He looked at us, sobbing, and said, "Where is my brother?" Those creatures must have done something to him. He cried so much that we agreed to go back outside and search for him. Vahshat asked me, "Where is the lantern?" I replied, I could not run with the lantern, so I dropped it there. Vahshat said, "Well, we need a lantern to see around us." Rahim said, "Do not worry, we have more lanterns in the storage." He went and returned with 2 lanterns and 2 sticks, and we headed toward the cemetery. Amin and I carried the lanterns in front, while Vahshat and Rahim followed behind us with the sticks. When we entered the cemetery, a dark figure, like a dead person who had risen from the grave, was coming toward us, moving in a strange way like a zombie, making a scary growling sound. When I looked back, I realized I was left behind again, and my friends were running away, screaming. This time, I did not drop the lantern and started running. I ran a bit toward the house, and when I looked back, the dark figure was slowly following me. I was the last one to reach the house. I jumped inside and closed the door. Amin started crying again, wailing, "They caught my brother. What should we do now?" Rahim asked while looking out the window. "There is no one in the village we can go to for help." Vahshat said, "When it gets brighter, we will go look for Ali Reza. He might have gotten lost because of the darkness." Suddenly, we heard Rahim shouting, "One of them is coming toward the house." We all rushed to the window, trembling with fear, and looked outside. The same creature we had seen in the cemetery was approaching us. When it got closer to the house, Amin said, "That is my brother Ali Reza," and quickly went to open the door. We were still trying to tell him, "Amin, wait a moment," when we saw him go outside. We watched through the window as Amin went to him, helped him under his arm, and after a moment, they entered the house together. Ali Reza was covered in mud from head to toe, with only his eyes visible. I approached him with suspicion and asked, "Is that really you? Where have you been?" But he was too cold and shivering to speak. Rahim quickly brought some clothes, and we changed Ali Reza's muddy clothes and lit the wood stove, placing him next to the fire. We gave him some tea, and once he warmed up, he was able to talk. Ali Reza said, "After seeing those creatures, I was so terrified that I just ran blindly in the dark. In the middle of the cemetery, I ran into a large pit full of mud, probably an empty grave, and I fell into it. I hit my head and lost consciousness. When I came to, I couldn't remember anything. I managed to pull myself out of the mud, but my knee hurt and I couldn't walk. Gradually, I remembered everything, and the fear of those creatures in the cemetery returned. When I saw the lantern's light, I was relieved and tried to call out to you, but my mouth was full of mud, and my voice couldn't be heard because of the pain and cold. Instead of helping, you ran away so fast that I had to make my way back alone, limping and shaking with fear. I said to Ali Reza, "You should thank God that we ran away. With how you looked, it's a good thing we didn't attack you with sticks to beat you." That night, fear kept us awake, and we talked about what had happened until the morning. When the sky became brighter, Rahim said, "At least come with me to get the shovel and pickaxe." The others said, "No way. We are never setting foot there again." Few hours later, we took the first bus back to the city. Later, we heard from Rahim that a few days after we left, when Rahim's father and his friend went to the village to dig up the treasure, the police caught and arrested them. Years later, when I spoke to an expert in antiquities, he told me, "Those 3 demons you saw the first time and the terrifying noise you heard were the cursed guardians of the treasure. You were so lucky that they didn't harm you, and only scared you."